This is Techstrong TV.
Hey folks, we're at AWS reInvent and we're talking with Rick Tam Daniels, who's head of partnerships and technology for Informatica. They just did some expanded partnerships with AWS and we're going to dive into that. Rick, welcome to the show.
Great, thanks for having me.
You guys have a long-standing partnership with AWS, so what exactly are you up to now and what's changing?
Well, so at Informatica, as you're right, we've had a long-standing relationship, more than 10 years. We've been working with AWS, and all our focus has been about really innovating and helping customers take their data assets, turn them into trusted data, and ultimately trusted outcomes. So what we announced this week were a bunch of new innovations with AWS that are really all focused around helping to democratize trusted data to all users in the enterprise. We're talking line of business users, developers, data scientists, really taking the power of trusted data out to everyone in the enterprise.
What's your sense of how much data is moving into the cloud? Or people still have stuff on premise? Is it kind of hybrid? Because data has gravity, right? It doesn't necessarily just lift and move by itself.
Yeah, absolutely. There is plenty of data still on premises, plenty of opportunity to get that data to the cloud. I think in the early days of cloud, you saw a lot of infrastructure-focused shifting of workloads and information. Today, what you're seeing is looking much more at the value of workloads and the transformational value they can have for a business perspective. So there's a lot of focus on taking core data systems, core data warehouses, data lakes, bringing them into the cloud to create a tremendous amount of agility and ability for customers to kind of leverage their data, which in today's economic climate, it's especially important as well that a lot of companies are finding themselves needing to transform again. They're facing new challenges, new opportunities, and data becomes a critical linchpin in being able to attack those opportunities and address those challenges.
Even before the cloud, most organizations were not especially good at managing data. Few of them would get a good housekeeping seal of approval for the way that they manage data. We move a lot of data up to the cloud. We have this notion of warehouses and lakes, and then it turns into a swamp.
Yeah.
What are people missing here? What's the thing that they should be thinking more about as they kind of think about moving data into the cloud? What's that thing that drives you crazy because it's a misstep and everybody does the same thing wrong?
I think one of the biggest things is two big points for customers. They understanding, first of all, what end state are they heading towards, right? Where are they heading? Where's the vector? Not just throwing a bunch of stuff into the cloud and hoping magic comes out of it. It's actually understanding, how am I going to deal with things like data discovery, data cataloging? How am I going to govern all this data and make sure it doesn't become the data swamp? And we at Informatica, a lot of those customers you mentioned in the on-premise days, we help those customers really get a handle on their data and really help scale with data. We've done the same in the cloud. And over the last 5 years, we've invested more than $1 billion, with a B, $1 billion in R&D, building a fully cloud-native data management capability that helps customers get started quickly, that also realize the full supply chain and life cycle of data that they need in their enterprise to be successful with these data-driven initiatives.
Do you think that we're living in a multi-cloud world, or are we moving towards a hybrid cloud world where we're actually going to build applications that access data that resides in multiple places? Because it seems to me most people are doing what I would call multi-cloud, but they're far from hybrid cloud.
I would say yes. We're seeing all of the above, right? So we do see a lot more customers who are on a multi-cloud journey. They're going to live in a hybrid state for a long time as well, right? As they start to move systems incrementally, and being able to manage and govern a data environment that is distributed is a critical requirement for almost all of our customers.
Back in the day, we used to, the code would go to where the data was. And then seems like for the last 10 years, we've just been moving data up into the cloud and kind of hoping that the code will follow suit. But do you think we're going to see more application development on the cloud itself, where the applications are going to reside there, where the data is? Because ultimately, the laws of physics have not been suspended, right? We need to, latency is an issue, and we need the code as close to the data as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do see a lot of traditional applications being moved to SaaS and cloud native. I think it's really important. And we see also on the analytics and AI side of things in particular as well, that work is happening where the data is. It's happening in the cloud. And actually, one of our big announcements we made this week was around taking the data management capabilities of our intelligent data management cloud platform and bringing them to developers inside of Amazon SageMaker. Right, so we're actually bringing the capabilities of data management, all cloud native, but making it available to those users who are actually taking that data and getting results from it. Right, so it is very important to have these both kind of move at the same time. Same reason also, you don't just move your warehouse without your data management. Right, it all needs to become cloud native. It needs to go to the cloud at the same time to have the most efficient management model for your data and analytics.
We hear a lot about data ops these days. Are you seeing folks adopting what appear to be best practices for data management? And why now? I mean, we've been having this issue forever.
Well, I think right now the data community, if you will, inside an enterprise is probably more expansive and more complex than it's ever been, right? And so you really need to have holistic frameworks that really connect the data producers with the data consumers, but do it in a way that creates governance and efficiency, doesn't create a lot of data duplication, right? You don't want data swamps, you don't want data silos, right? You really want your enterprise to be able to access its data, understand what it has, understand what that data means to the business, have trust in it, and then get access to it. And that's exactly what we're doing with our fully cloud-native data management platform.
There's also all these data scientists in the world now, and they're trying to manage data. Where do they fit in with the traditional IT organization in terms of how do I bring these cultures together?
Well, I think you kind of tapped on a big theme that we see around democratization of data, where we do see user personas, more personas, citizen data integrators, citizen data scientists who are out there in the line of business. They understand what the data means. They're not traditional IT, central IT folks. And so, they're also very important players in this whole ecosystem, and making sure that they can get the benefits of data management and they're not reinventing the wheel in their tools is really important. Again, this announcement we made basically takes all the connectivity, the years and years of knowledge about what are common data transformations, what are common data quality rules, and we're putting those directly in the hands of developers where they like to work, though, where the data scientists like to work. So they're incredibly important in this transformation affecting it, but they also need the same kind of data management tools and rigor that has traditionally been needed with IT.
Developers, of course, they have best DevOps practices that they adhere to, or hopefully. How will the DevOps teams and the data ops teams come together? And do I just throw them all in a room and lock the door and hope for something good? Or is there some advice that you can give to put these guys together in a way that's constructive?
Well, one of the big things, and this is another part of what we announced this week, is around our cloud data marketplace. So we've created, basically think of it as a storefront for all the enterprise data assets. And this storefront becomes incredibly important in that data democratization, and that it's bringing together all the knowledge of the data producers, the data owners, and putting it in the hands directly of the consumers, but also creating the interactions to make sure that we're in compliance with data privacy policies and things like that, and data use is being used correctly. And so what we announced with Amazon is the integration with Amazon or AWS Data Exchange. So AWS Data Exchange is a marketplace of public data sets, about 3,500 different data sets. And so now with this integration, customers can look not only at their own data through our data marketplace, but also what's available within AWS Data Exchange. So they can really have a one-stop shop for all of their data assets, but they have the confidence in where that data came from. They can see the lineage. They have a lot of trust in the data, which becomes fundamental to being able to really use that data as an asset.
Are you going to also work with other cloud providers? I would assume that you have relationships with those guys. Is the relationship different with Amazon versus them, or is it all pretty much even keel?
Well, Informatica occupies a very unique market position in that we have thousands and thousands of customers, and so all of our customers are across all the clouds. So yes, we have strategic relationships with actually 4 cloud providers. So AWS, of course, and then Azure, Google, and Oracle Cloud as well, most recently. And that's because our customers want to use those different infrastructures, and Informatica is uniquely able to go deep into each of those ecosystems, which again is part of the announcements. These integrations with AWS just speak to how much we work closely with AWS product teams to make sure we deliver the best-in-class joint solutions. And in fact, we were actually awarded this week the 2022 Global Design Partner of the Year for AWS, right? So that means that we basically engage in the most integrations, innovations together. So Informatica is able to have strategic partnerships, but we're also able to go deep in those individual ecosystems and optimize data management to align to the strategies and the patterns that are being prescribed in that ecosystem.
So ultimately, what's your best advice to folks? Because not only are they dealing with, excuse me, try that again. So what's your best advice to folks? Because not only are they dealing with more data, I need water. Is this mine?
I don't know who's that.
All right, well. Just give me that thing there, can you?
This?
Yeah, one of those will do fine. Hey guys, I'll just use this Ricola, I'll be all right. All right.
The magic of editing.
All right. This is the last question, you'll be all right. All right. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. All right, you ready?
Yep.
All right. So what's your best advice to folks? Holy moly.
Don't worry about it. Clear it up. It's all that singing you did at the Aerosmith concert last night.
Must be. All right. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So what's your best advice to folks who are not only struggling with massive amounts of data, but are also, there's more types of data than ever. And it seems like as we go along, we keep just adding more and more types of data. We see a lot of video now. How are folks going to cope with all that? What's the thing that you wish that they would think about now before they get started?
I'd say 2 big things. One is when they go engage in these initiatives is understanding what business outcomes they're solving for and making sure they're focusing their efforts around their data to drive business outcomes, right? It's not just data for data's sake, it's actually to drive the business, right? The second thing, I think, to your point about how do you deal with all this proliferation of data, data governance is the linchpin of that. Every customer conversation I have, data governance is probably the hottest topic, right? But it's how do you achieve data governance in a way that's not off in a silo, that's not one team, but actually truly engages all the stakeholders in the data community to make sure that, again, data can be discovered, it can be prepared, it can be cleansed, it can be trusted, and ultimately delivered to the end users who need it quickly, right? I think that's the key here, is having that governance to prevent the sprawl, prevent a lot of the problems of the past, but also as not just a protective measure, but also an accelerant, something that accelerates the use of data. And that's really our focus, is helping customers accelerate and scale the adoption and use of trusted data to transform and drive outcomes.
All right, as they used to say, measure twice, cut once. It applies to data management. Hey, Rick, thanks for coming by.
Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Cloud Native Now is the web's leading resource for the growing cloud native ecosystem. CloudNativeNow.com is your destination for news, thought leadership, features, and webinars on cloud native architecture, Kubernetes, serverless, cloud native application development, microservices, service mesh, cloud native security, and more. Stay on the cutting edge of modern application development at Cloud Native Now.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Techstrong TV.
Well, welcome. Hey, we're at a special location today. We are at the Techstrong Studios here in the Wynn in Las Vegas for reInvent 2022. Lots of exciting things happening, and we have some fantastic guests lined up. Speaking of which, Topper Winslow, who is a CEO with StackState. Welcome.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Good to have you. So, for a few folks who may not know who StackState is or yourself, tell us just a little bit about the space that you're in, and we'll kind of get into what's happening.
Sure. So StackState's an observability company. It's a crowded space, tons of vendors, a lot of money's been poured into it over the last decade, really in parallel with all this transition that larger enterprises are making to go from managing their own infrastructure to becoming cloud native, driving a lot of retooling. We've taken an approach that embraces, I think, many of the things that companies care about, harnessing all this data that their environments are generating, but trying to provide a different kind of explanatory context around it by infusing all that with topology, the relationships between all the building blocks that companies have that make up these environments that they're migrating to, and understanding how that topology morphs over time, and then correlating that with all the other telemetry information. So we're a company that's 7 years old, a lot of big enterprise customers in financial services, telecommunications, managed service providers, but it's a horizontal platform to help people deal with the increasing rate of change in their environments.
Yeah, in the startup world, we always say if you can solve your problems in the financial services or telecom or the big, cable companies, whatever it is, that's when you've really kind of reached that level where you can do some big stuff.
Yeah, and that's really where we were born. We were born out of a consulting project inside a large Dutch bank that was having persistent performance problems with one of their big customer-facing apps. They couldn't solve it themselves. They called in a trusted services partner who sent a couple young hotshot performance consultants. They set about trying to gather all the data that they could and pretty quickly realized it's not that there's not enough data. It's just that there's no integrated data set that puts it all together, and there's no sort of explanatory context wrapped around all that data. And that's what they set out to build starting back in 2015.
It's interesting because in the ops world, we always talk about log aggregation, getting all the data together in one place, putting some nice query language and app building capabilities is kind of where that all started. But it seems like both the size and scale of applications and now cloud native, the complexity of the apps that we're building, the distribution across clouds, we're dealing a much bigger and important variable. So it's not just about getting the data together in one place.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the volume of data that's thrown off by all this cloud infrastructure is massive. And I think what many approaches have focused on to date is, okay, how do we gather more and more of this data? How do we store it for longer and longer periods? How do we make it more queryable? And I think those are all good things. That's a step in the right direction. Our view, though, is that you need a secret decoder ring, like a Rosetta Stone, to separate the signal that's in all the noise of all this telemetry. And that's where topology comes in.
Yeah, topology is that context you were talking about, right? I mean,
Topology is the
I don't need
context.
more data, right? I've got plenty of data. Maybe I don't know if I have the right data, but I need that context around it to tell me what's going on.
Exactly. Show me what changed. Show me how the dependencies between different components, different Kubernetes containers, different microservices, your increasingly virtualized infrastructure. Show me how those relationships are changing all the time, because anytime there's a problem, the first question that usually gets asked in a war room is, what changed?
Yeah. Nothing changed. Something's always changed.
That's almost never true. In fact, I've seen recent surveys that are saying like the rate of change in most large scale environments is like 1 change per second.
Exactly. I've had this conversation with several people of we need to think of a world of constant change. It's a moving stream. It's not a state that stays in one place at any one point in time, because it's always anywhere in the stack, across the stack, environments, locations, all of that. So that's a different mindset. Much bigger problem to try to solve, and tougher one.
It is, yeah. I mean, when we set out to do it, we sort of thought having a graph of the topology and how that graph was changing second by second was the way to unlock all the insights. The problems that we had in our early developments was trying to do it with a commercial off-the-shelf graph database. And what we found is that none of them had the scalability properties to just deal with the rate of change that's going on in these environments. If you've got an environment that consists of thousands or hundreds of thousands, even millions of components, and those are changing on a second-by-second basis, it becomes super hard to find a graph database that will accommodate that rate of change. So we ended up building our own.
Just tracking down the change. Exactly. That's what the problem is.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I know Stack State is, AI ops is part of the equation too, and there's the market hype, and I've been working on AI since the '80s, so it was going to solve problems back, and it gets overhyped. But there's a lot of value that we see now through machine learning algorithms and things we can apply in targeted ways.
Yep, I think that's true. I sort of think of AI ops in some ways as a bit of a Rorschach test, right? People sort of project what they want to see in it. We like one of the definitions that we've seen out there that says it's fundamentally about cross-domain data ingestion and analytics. It's about wrapping topology context around it. It's about doing event correlation, and it's about suggesting possible remediations when problems happen. Those things resonate with us and fit very well in our model.
Interesting. So we're Toffer. We're at obviously in Las Vegas at AWS reInvent, and man, I went to the first reInvent, and this thing is so massive. I mean, it was big then. I was surprised how big the first one was. But tell us about kind of your perspective about working with the hyperscalers, the large cloud service providers like the reInvents in the world, and how you fit into that ecosystem, because you're getting more than a platform when you're working with the hyperscalers. It's a big ecosystem.
For sure. I think the strategy for many of the hyperscalers is they want to go beyond just providing commoditized infrastructure to more and more value-added services layered on top of that. And they have their own approaches for observability, providing managed Grafana, managed Prometheus services. And there's a bunch of sessions here at reInvent about that. And then they've got their whole marketplaces to let 1,000 flowers bloom, where you have folks like us and our many competitors who have their own offerings for sale in those. So I think it's a smart strategy, right? You provide a base level of capabilities that customers can get going with at no to low cost, and then have a bunch of other sort of value-added players available through their marketplace.
Now, you mentioned you started in the financial services. Have you found that you kind of go with your customers into the cloud as they move into it? Do they find you in the marketplace more often than not? Which is, I would imagine, it's probably the latter story, or the first where you're going with your customers into the cloud.
Yeah, it's mostly that. It's one of the things that we find is a precipitating event to get customers rethinking about how they manage their whole IT operations is these digital transformations and the migrations to the cloud. And as they start implementing all these technologies, CI/CD, pushing new code into the environment, increasingly sort of virtualized and containerized environments, it puts a lot of stress on the traditional tooling. And so, starting with the customer, while they're still in their early phases of their digital transformation, and then going from on-prem to hybrid, and then increasingly launching pure cloud-native services is a great path for us to get engaged with.
I imagine, in addition, of course, looking and talking to new potential customers here, you have a lot of customers that are attending. What would you say some of the challenges that they've been with you for a while, they're matured with you in terms of observability and capabilities that they're implementing. What are the next set of challenges that people are looking for? I've got to figure out how to solve these problems now.
Yeah, as people are rolling out sort of Kubernetes as the core of their infrastructure, and we're seeing that across all industries. I mean, it's a big part of telco and the whole transition to 5G. Financial services are doing it. As they increasingly rely on Kubernetes troubleshooting is hard. All this ephemeral infrastructure, and there's been a handful of companies that have been created that deal explicitly with Kubernetes troubleshooting. Our view is that this topology-led approach makes a ton of sense in that environment where the containers are being spun up and spun down, and the relationships and dependencies are changing at a high rate. So that's when you combine that topology map with all the telemetry data that both the Kubernetes infrastructure generates, as well as all the associated surrounding infrastructure, that's the key to really finding out where the core problems are, and differentiating whether it's happening in the Kubernetes layer or some of the dependent layers.
It's interesting because we introduced the complexity of Kubernetes, all the great problems that it solves, but it brings with it that complexity. The microservices architecture itself, right now you're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of services across applications, not a dozen or two in a SOA kind of service. So that a complexity in just understanding what's happening there.
Yeah.
On top of Kubernetes, on top of all the cloud services, it's a complex stack.
Yeah, well, and then you layer in sort of continuous code pushes to refresh those microservices. The code is changing, the configuration of components are changing, the relationships between components are changing. It's this level of complexity and high rate of change that is driving this whole rethinking of how people tool their management infrastructure.
And the ephemeral nature, the time nature of what. That condition doesn't exist anymore. That code's not that code.
Exactly.
Now that we're troubleshooting.
And that's why you kind of need this sort of time machine to be able to rewind the DVR movie of your environment and say, okay, these problems happened, an hour ago. What was the change that happened 1 hour and 1 second ago that started to precipitate them? And that when you have that insight, you're not chasing 1,000 separate alerts that are really symptoms of the underlying cause. You can really drill into the underlying cause itself.
Mm-hmm. It's a big market. I mean, observability's been hot for a while. There's a lot of players in it. There are new people coming in too, who are kind of native observability. Other folks that have come up the log aggregation, log management. How do you stand out? How do you kind of show your chops in a market that's got a lot of good players in this area?
Yeah, good companies, well backed, and some decent open source options as well too.
Exactly.
Yeah, our view is that you've got to be low friction in order to give people a taste of what you do, right? So the